Honey, can everybody hear me?
Hello.
Oh, hello. Did you have a good lunch?
Oh yeah,
Awesome. Awesome. Good.
I had
Okay.
my breakfast.
Oh, you had your breakfast for lunch. Nothing wrong with that, right?
No,
Sometimes
nothing
good
wrong with
old
that.
eggs. Yeah, good old eggs too is good for supper sometimes.
Yeah.
Okay, well, again, we've opened up the session and we'll just get people in as they come in. But I think we should get started. It's almost 10 after 1, so we'll just keep on our schedule for today and welcome a few people back from this morning, I can see. So Chibi for joining us again for this 1 to 3 session, 1736 Royal Proclamation, Historical Significance and Treaty Making in Canada. Again, miigwech to Bentley Cheechoo joining us from Thunder Bay as he continues on from his discussion this morning. And he did mention that he'd like some engagement in this session, any comments, that kind of thing. So I'll just turn it over to you, Bentley, and take over from here. Miigwech.
Okay, make that Gary. This morning, a long-winded presentation on the 7 Years' War. And the results of the 7 Years' War was the King of England at the time, King George III, issued a Royal Proclamation, and from approximately about 1756 to 1763 is the period known as the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War. Continued throughout North America. The government at the time, which was British run government, created what they call an Indian Department, and it was run by Sir William Johnson. He began to prepare a future relations between Britain and the First Nations in Canada, also called them allies. It's very interesting in history when you read about allies. You're an ally when you're involved in the war and then winning the war, but once that's done, everybody forgets about it. Johnson realized that the encroachment of settlement into the First Nation lands would ultimately affect the relations or lead to future conflict. As the colonies, the British colonies, pushed their borders west beyond the Appalachian Mountains in the United States, which was the area west of the Appalachian Mountains that was unsettled territory. And 150 years of European competition, conflict came to an end at the signing of the 1963 Treaty of Paris. Through this agreement that I mentioned a bit about this morning, France ceded sees much of its North American possession, making Britain the primary European power throughout much of North America, as we know today. To demonstrate British authority, officials in London recommended that King George III officially issue a proclamation announcing the new administrative structures for North America, as well as establish new procedures and protocols for its relations with First Nations people. And second to that, the King George III on October 7th, 1763, issued a royal proclamation establishing a new administrative structure for the recently acquired territories in North America. Also established new rules and protocols for future relations with First Nation. Remember this morning, that's when in the 7 Years' War, signing of the Treaty of Paris, Britain became the sole superpower in North America. The proclamation also has two significant parts. First, it defined the land west of the established colonies as Indian territories, where the First Nation people should not be molested or disturbed by settlers, and where the Indian Department would be the primary liaison between the British Crown and the First Nation. Secondly, in order to prevent any further abuse, the proclamation prohibited colonial governors from making any grants or taking any land cessions from First Nation people. From First Nation people, establishing a set of protocols, procedures for purchasing of Indian land, and that the Crown is one that, what do you call it, would purchase Indian purchase land, and also they would be the ones that would can only cede or if there was a treaty, the land would be surrendered to the Crown, and then the Crown could sell that to the settlers. So at this time, what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you, as I said this morning, a video from a friend of mine, Mary Sinclair, who to discuss that further, how how the proclamation, how he sees the proclamation from his own personal view, how he saw it unfolding, and how he sees it working, and how he sees it into the future. So I'd like to share my screen with you to do that.
So you should have sharing capability. Let me know if you can get it. Well, I guess we'll see. One second.
Hello, everybody. I'm Murray Sinclair. I'm the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation.
It's only going to take me a second.
Everybody see the screen?
Yes, it's there. Miigwech.
As some of you know, my son has got a PhD in literature, and when he announced to us that he was going to do his master's degree and his PhD in literature, I said, well, that's the second most useless degree in the world. Right up there with a PhD in philosophy. Just bound to mess up your head. And but he's done a lot of work with that degree in literature in terms of writing about the importance of story and talking about the importance of story in our culture and how, in fact, we were not an illiterate people. That's what his PhD dissertation was about, that we were not an illiterate people. And the work that he has done, in fact, started with the review of some of the writings of Peter Jones, about whom you've heard a bit here tonight. That was part of his master's thesis. But from that, he went on to talk about, in fact, what our sources of literacy were. And he has written about, in fact, the belts that you have had an opportunity to witness here tonight, on how the belts, in fact, were used as sources of speech for our people, and that when they were brought out, the belts would be read to the people. So if I'd known that Alan was going to read 4 speeches, or 5 was it, I might have brought a longer speech. but actually I haven't brought any speech. I just came here in order to talk with you about what it is that I see we are going to have to consider when it comes to the issue of the Royal Proclamation, 1763. I had an opportunity recently to do a presentation on that question for the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. And the paper I wrote was entitled, My Love-Hate Relationship with the Royal Proclamation. And you understand now, I think, a little bit about why that is so from what it is that you've heard here tonight. That in fact, the Royal Proclamation has been said to be the Bill of Rights or the Magna Carta for the Indian people in North America. It is a declaration which recognizes the right to exist and the right to be self-governing within our territories, and that it was a promise that was made by the King of England in 1763 that recognized, in fact, the sovereignty of the Indian nations that are identified in the treaty and in the proclamation, and I think arguably recognized for all Indian nations in North America. We need to understand that the Royal Proclamation was issued after the war between the French and the English, and after the Battle of the Plains of Abraham, and after a whole bunch of very important historical incidents that occurred in which the power and the right of the Indian nations of North America played a very significant role, and in fact were highly sought after by those who were involved in that conflict at the time. And the role of the Aboriginal people at that time in resolving that conflict or assisting in the resolution of that conflict and in how that conflict all ended was known far and wide by all of those who were in charge. And the Royal Proclamation was a recognition that Aboriginal people, Indian nations, First Nations as we now call them, were not to be trifled with, that they were to be respected, and that their rights to their territory and their right to take care of themselves within their own territory was not to be interfered with. And the declaration by the Crown at the time was that nobody, no colonial entity, no private individual, nobody could interfere with the Indian nations within their territories. And that declaration seems to have been made very clearly. But why I came to hate the Royal Proclamation was that it defended us against nothing, that it was not in fact a shield, and it was in fact used by the governments of this country and the United States and England since then as a vehicle, as a means by which they could interfere with First Nations, with their territorial rights. Because if you think about what the Royal Proclamation was, it was in fact an assumption of sovereignty over Indian territory by the Crown. The Royal Proclamation in and of itself is a declaration by the King of England that I am now the one that they must deal with for their territory. I am now the one who will be their protector. I am now the one who is the only one that they can deal with. So it was, in effect, a very arrogant, self-centered, selfish assumption of power on the part of the sovereign of England. So that's why I hate it. But that's also why it's important. It's important because of the recognition it gives, but it's also important because of the recognition it has taken away. And the recognition it took away was the rights of Indigenous nations to make their own determinations about who they were going to deal with. They had that right inherently before the Royal Proclamation, and they probably still had it afterwards to the extent that they could enforce it. But it became almost impossible to enforce it because the Treaty of Paris, which resolved the world war that had occurred between France and England and Spain and Portugal, became a source of a conspiracy amongst all the other nations of the world that those other three would not deal with the Indian nations in North America, that they would take a hands-off approach. So almost by omission, the First Nations of North America had nobody else that they could deal with when it came to negotiating any relationship other than with the Crown and Right of England, because all of the other world powers backed away. France and Spain and Portugal all agreed through the Treaty of Paris that they would recognize British sovereignty in North America. That, of course, became challenged by the Americans subsequently in their War of Independence in 1776. But that aside, the relationship became a limitation upon First Nations people. But it did provide that opportunity, at least, for First Nations to be able to assert their own internal sovereignty, to be assured, because the Declaration promised that there would be no interference in their internal operation. And one of the weaknesses that others have said exists with the Royal Proclamation was that the wording of it and the negotiation of the wording of it did not involve Indian leaders at the time. They were not engaged in the process of the proclamation itself, and that's true. Royal proclamations are documents that are prepared by the government and issued by the king with the assistance of his ministers. So technically, it wasn't a treaty because it was not negotiated. The terms of it were not negotiated with the First Nation leaders in North America at the time. But it became something different because of Sir William Johnson, about whom we have heard. Because in the fall of 1763, after the Royal Proclamation had been issued on October the 7th, he invited all of the Indian leaders of the Great Lakes area to come to a gathering in order to talk about the Royal Proclamation. And he sent copies of the Royal Proclamation to all of the leaders in all of those territories to invite them to this gathering. And the historical evidence shows that, in fact, over 2,000 of them subsequently gathered with him at Niagara in 1764. And at that time, in that place, he had the proclamation read to them in their languages and explained to them in their languages so that they understood what the Royal Proclamation said. And then he promised them, through the issuance of those wampum belts about which we have heard so much tonight, he promised them that the terms of the Royal Proclamation would now become the basis of the relationship between Indian nations in North America and the Crown. And it was important that he do that because of Pontiac, because of what Pontiac showed Indian people were capable of if the Crown did not respect their territory. And because of that warning that he had issued to them, and because of their fear that if the Indian nations ever did come together and unite, as Pontiac had wanted all Indian nations to do, to drive out the Englishmen, to drive out the white people, because they were afraid of that, they needed Indian people to accept the Royal Proclamation as the basis of that relationship. And so they did. In those wampum belts, particularly the two-row wampum that you have heard about, the friendship belts that have been discussed here, were revealed and were shared at that time with all of the leadership. And some of those leaders had traveled for months. Some came from as far away as Hudson Bay, from as far west as the Mississippi, and from as far east as the Maritimes. Mi'kmaq people were represented, we were told, at those discussions at Niagara. And those discussions went on for weeks and weeks. And it was through that discussion and those issuances of those wampum belts and those assurances that were given that the promises were made by the Indian nations that they would not engage in war against the Crown, and that they would recognize the ability of the Crown to act as they wished to act under the Royal Proclamation. So they would recognize the importance of that document. And so it became incorporated into what has been referred to as the Treaty of Niagara. The Treaty of Niagara technically is not a land surrender treaty, so therefore it doesn't get the recognition that most other treaties do. It is a treaty of friendship and peace, as Sir William Johnson referred to it, a treaty of offense and defense. A treaty in which you agree that you will be our allies and we agree that we will be yours, and that we will defend each other. And it was understood that those agreements, those treaties, those belts would be brought out every year to be reminders to all of the people and all of the subsequent leadership of that relationship. But they weren't. They were for a while, but it quickly disappeared. So that by the time of the War of 1812, the opportunity for those celebrations had dropped by the wayside. And we don't see those meetings and those dialogues occurring much anymore. And by the time of Confederation in Canada in 1867, you never hear about those things happening. There was a reference here to a reminder that was issued by the chiefs of the Ojibwe people. Reminder to the English authorities, you have forgotten about that relationship that we formed 100 years ago. And yet, that reminder did nothing to bring things back to a head. But there are provisions within the British North America Act that serve as a connection to the Royal Proclamation. The fact, for example, that Indians and lands reserved for Indians are under the federal jurisdiction and that provinces have no control, technically, over Indians and lands reserved for Indians is a reflection of the same assurance that was in the Royal Proclamation of 1763. And the fact that the treaties that were entered into following Confederation in Western Canada were treaties that were negotiated in the same basis as had been promised in the Royal Proclamation were all reminiscent of those assurances and those processes that were enunciated in the Royal Proclamation of 1763. So it did become the vehicle by which the Crown exercised its authority to take lands away, because it said, you can only give your lands to us, and we are the only ones who can take your lands from you. And after Confederation, they proceeded to take the lands away. And even after a while, they gave up on the treaty process and just took the lands away anyway. So as I say, the Royal Proclamation, as a Bill of Rights, as a protection, served no protection whatsoever. And it was because, I think, everybody who was in a position of importance on the side of the Crown simply forgot, conveniently perhaps, but simply forgot about the Royal Proclamation and the importance of it. Such that, in fact, when you talked about it at the time I was in law school, in those ancient days when dinosaurs still roamed the earth, as my granddaughter asked me one day, did you ever get chased by a dinosaur? That's what she And my answer, incidentally, as I was telling Sakej, my answer was, no, I always turned and fought them. So I was still a hero in her eyes. An old hero, but still a hero. But at the time that I was in law school, when we were studying the Royal Proclamation, the study of the Royal Proclamation lasted about 3.5 minutes, if that. It was only a passing reference to the fact that this proclamation existed at one time. It may have changed since, but this isn't that long ago. This is within my lifetime. This was 34 years ago that we were studying it in that way. But what we need to remember is that not only was I studying it in that way, but every single person who went through law school before me, since Confederation, and even after me, also received the same degree of attention to it. Every single lawyer who worked for the Government of Canada was taught that much or that little about the Royal Proclamation. Every single judge in Canada received that kind of minimal education about the Royal Proclamation. And in the early cases that deal with the issue of Indian title, that deal with the issue of Aboriginal rights, in our courts and in the legal briefs that are filed, not only by the Crown, in whose interest such an argument was important, but also on behalf of the First Nations, many of those briefs, in fact, misargue the importance of the Royal Proclamation. And it's because people were coming to the issue from a position of ignorance, lack of knowledge, not a negative position in the sense of deliberately trying to mislead people. But they were coming at it because no one had taught them differently. And now, in this day and age, we are learning about things differently. Each and every opportunity that we have within our community today, we have academics and intellects and students and professors and professionals like you who are lifting up the leaves to look underneath to see what's there. And that's important that we do that we continue to do that for ourselves, to inform ourselves about the rightness of what it is that our elders are saying. For the longest time, we were unable to believe in our own elders. We were unable to believe in what they were telling us because we had been taught in law school that belief required certain levels and kinds and ways of proof. And we just didn't have those levels and ways and kinds of proof in front of us. We had been misinformed as well as lawyers. And now our eyes are being opened, our way is being shown, and we are now beginning to use those skills to influence others, to say, now just wait a minute. All that you have been doing has been because you did not know any better. And to be fair to those people, we cannot hate them because they didn't know any better. We can only hate them if they continue to do the wrong thing now that they know better. But we still have a long way to go to open their eyes as well. And understand this, it was a deliberate process of misinformation that occurred. And with the work that I'm now engaged in with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it is clear that they were intending to take children away from their families and place them in institutions for the purpose of removing them from their culture, from their language, and from their identity. But it was also to prevent that transfer of knowledge that takes place from community to child. It's so important. You've all heard the expression, it takes a village to raise a child. And it's because we know that parents, and you'll learn this quickly, those of you who are going to have children, because those of us who have children have been reminded of it, we don't know anything as parents. And it's because of that that we need the aunties and the uncles, and we need the grandmothers and the grandfathers, and we need the elders in our community, and we need our leaders to be saying to our children the same things that we say to them as parents, so that it reinforces what it is that we want our children to know. That's why the village is so important to the education of our children. But with residential schools, what they did was they took the children away from the families, and they took them away from their villages and placed them in these institutions so that they could put them into a closed environment of indoctrination into a different way of thinking. But if they had only done that, it might have been salvageable, because then the children could have returned to those villages and the villages could have given them back that knowledge. But then the government and the churches and society proceeded to destroy the villages, because through legislation the leadership was undermined, ceremonies were prohibited and were outlawed, just being an Indian turned you into a non-person. Took away the right to vote so that you couldn't vote those people out of office who were doing those kinds of things. You couldn't hire lawyers to challenge those laws because you were legally prevented from hiring lawyers. And you couldn't sue the government unless they gave you permission to sue them. And nobody ever got permission to sue them. And you couldn't protest even. Became a conspiracy against the law if 3 or more Indians gathered in a place to discuss their grievances against the Crown. So all of the means by which the villages could be maintained were taken away from the parents who were left behind. And as a result, when the children came out of the schools, they were returned to communities that each generation was less and less capable of giving them this kind of knowledge. I'm not surprised to hear that those belts are not in the hands of the people to whom they were entrusted, and they are in museums and other places, because it was illegal to hang on to them. It was illegal to try to keep them. It was illegal to bring them out to talk about them from 1874 on. And as a result of that, some of those things simply went underground and people would do them in hidden places. I can remember the first time I ever went to a sweat lodge back in the 1970s. The elder, we drove to his house, he put us in his truck, and there were about 6 of us in the back of his pickup truck. And then he drove down this gravel road, and he drove off the end of the gravel road, through a ditch, and through a field, and through a bush, and up a hill, and over the hill, and across a creek. Drove for miles and miles, way off into the bush. And here we are all bouncing around in the back, you know. And we're all saying, why is he going away so far? It's because we used to have to hide in order to do that. All of you know these kinds of things. You can talk about that. Maybe some of you young people don't know that. We used to have to hide just to do those kinds of things. Whenever I go to schools now, we always have elders come in and do a prayer, or there may be a drum group that comes in and sings a song for the students. And the students are shocked if I say to them, if you had done this, if your grandfather had done this when he was a little boy, he could have got into trouble, because it was illegal to sit around a drum. It was illegal to dress up like Indians. Wearing Indian garb was an offense under the Indian Act. I'm still not sure what Indian garb means and so on. Maybe just wearing a loincloth, which should be illegal in Canada. Particularly in Canada, where it's freezing. But everything and anything relating to our culture and our sense of identity was rendered illegal. And as a result of that, the capacity of our villages to give that knowledge and to give that sense of identity and to give that sense of pride to our children was taken away from them. And so this knowledge that has been shared with us about the Royal Proclamation and the belts and what the belts mean and the mere existence of the belts was something that was prohibited for so long. I was looking at this canoe. The Royal Proclamation is written on the side of that canoe. Be sure you read it before you go, so you can see, in fact, now it's different today. But what makes it different today is not just that we can do it if we want, but it's that we have to do it, and we can do it, so we should. And my granddaughter, who still thinks that I was chased by dinosaurs, she knows all there is to know about our creation story. Those of you who are students today know that I talked about how important that is. She knows about our creation story. She knows about her grandfather and where her grandfather came from. She knows about our people and where our people came from. She knows all of those things, and she's prepared to stand up and talk about them. She was at the Manitoba Museum one day. And if you ever go to the Manitoba Museum, you'll see a big mural. It's about 30 feet wide. And inside this mural, there's a pictograph of an Indian on a horseback about to shoot a buffalo. And the fellow who was leading all of these little children, she was in her class, all of these little children were being led through this. And the museum guide said, "This is a picture of an Aboriginal man about to shoot a buffalo with a bow and arrow," he said. "There used to be Aboriginal people here who did that." That's what he said. At which point, my granddaughter put up her hand and said, "Excuse me, but I'm Aboriginal and I'm still here." 6 years old. All of our children should not be hesitating to do that. They should all feel the importance that we are entitled to feel about who we are. And so I just wish she could have seen this, to know that this is still here. Not only that, but she could have heard this talk. Now that you have borne witness to it, your responsibility is to carry this message and to talk about this. Don't keep this to yourself. You tell everybody that you know that those belts still exist and they're still brought out, and there are still people like this man who can talk about them. And we need to bring them out all the time, because that's what was meant to be. Our belief at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is that if we are going to have a process of reconciliation, it must be founded on the mutual respect that was initially promised to the indigenous nations of this part of the world. And that mutual respect is reflected in the Royal Proclamation. And that's why I love it. That's why I love it, because the mutual respect is reflected in that document. And we must return to that position of mutual respect, and we must make sure that every single child in the public school system is taught about that mutual respect, in order that we can move forward together, all of us, to ensure that we find out what our future together is going to be like, in order to reduce our conflict, hopefully, but at least find a way to resolve the conflicts more easily than we are doing at this point in time. So thank you for letting me be part of this day. I appreciate being invited here and being part of your evening. I appreciate as well how important this is to all of you. And I wish you all well in your endeavors. And thank the leadership, Chief, for letting me be part of this day, and also for inviting me and letting me be part of your territory for this period of time. Miigwech.
Hello, okay. What I'd like to do right now is take a short break to give everybody a chance to reflect, and after that presentation, and then when we get back, we can I can talk a little bit more about the Royal Proclamation, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about the actual document itself that was issued, and then what we can do from there is we can have a participation of others. If you have any comments you want to make, you can provide those comments, and out of those comments, maybe others might have a comment, so on and so forth. So we'll commence with that right after the break that we have. Or no, I want to right after the break, I want to sort of conclude, not conclude, or come to some, what do you call it, an understanding of the royal proclamation and significance that it had in what do you call it, in not only in society but also significance that that came about as far as what they call Aboriginal people are concerned in Canada. So I don't know, Carrie, what do you think? We're going to take maybe a 10-minute break to then we can continue on from there.
That sounds good to me. If everybody's, I'm sure everyone's okay with that. So if we look at our time, that would take us to about, I guess, 5 after,
Okay.
about 5 after 2. Would that work?
Yep.
Okay. Now how we'll take that break and get our thinking caps on.
Okay.
Okay, we'll take a break. 5 after 2. Miigwech.
Hello, is everybody back?
Hello, yes. Okay. Yeah, we're all still here. We're still with you, Bentley.
Okay, thank you very much.
Aha.
But just by what do you call it, thumbs up. How did people enjoy that or did not enjoy that presentation by Murray Sinclair? So anyway, I'll continue to present the more in line with the text of the Royal Proclamation, because in that proclamation, as Mary Sinclair has talked about in general context, it's not done in the context where we're actually talking about what actually was said in the proclamation, the Royal Proclamation. Mary Sinclair has said that the legal system, as we know it today, is one that we have to show proof, and that something happened or whatever ever said. So we don't want to get into that because I want to talk about things like Murray from a perspective of what do you call it, what we have, what we see as the information that should go forward to our people. But I think one of the things that's going to be important is, and I'm going to talk about that a little later on before we close off our session, that the importance of how we what we've learned, the discussion we've learned from this discussion, what we've learned, to bring that forward into what do you call it, how we can use that in the education of our own children. Maybe not necessarily in the classroom, but as individuals that have access to an information and how that is brought forward. Like Murray also talks about it very, very gently, I guess, walk through that, saying that maybe this is not, what do you call it, we shouldn't hate somebody for what happened, but maybe we should hate the people that don't want to listen. And I think it's some of that is poor words of how we can, what do you call it, deal with each other in whether truth and reconciliation or whatever, because it is important that we do not that I'm not here, or we should not be looking at hating each other, but we should look for ways through whether it's truth and reconciliation or whatever, how we can move forward. And with that, because Murray did talk about utilizing the education system to help to teach all Aboriginal people about how we can all get along and in this country, and there's a need for it. But although knowing fully well that it's a task that's going to be a huge task that we need to undertake. But the proclamation itself is a document that has a number of provisions. Some of them you heard already, but there's a number of provisions that the Royal Proclamation has, and there's something that's in the libraries, in the archives of Canada, and they were referred to during the 1980s when the repatriation of Canada and the Constitution Act of 1982. All of these documents were referred to, and it's not what you call it. There's a lot of truth in what Murray talked about. He's saying the 3.5 minutes of what you call it, education or researching the proclamation, the Royal Proclamation. It's almost like doing it in passing. It's nothing of significance. But it's a very important document. It's significant, and it's significant in a way that what was said in the document, and how things move forward into future time from 1763. The Royal Proclamation of 1763, which was brought forward October 7, 1763 by the King of England at the King George III. Whereas we have taken into our royal consideration the extension and valuable acquisition of America, secured to our crown by the late Treaty of Paris, definitive Treaty of Paris, concluded at Paris, the 10th day of February last. That's talking about 1763. And being desirous that our loving subjects, as well as our kingdom, and of our colonies in America, may avail themselves with all convenient speed of great benefits and advantages which must accrue, therefore, to our commerce, manufactures, and navigation. We have thought fit that the advice of our Privy Council to issue this Royal Proclamation, whereby to publish and declare all our loving subjects that we have with the advice of the Privy Council, granted letter patent under our Great Seal of Great Britain, under the Great Seal of Great Britain, to erect into the countries and islands, ceded and confirmed to us by the said treaty. Therefore, distinct and separate governments, sealed and called by the name of Quebec, East Florida, West Florida, and Canada, and limited and bound by the first, the Quebec and the government and the government of Quebec bound in the Labrador coast by the River St. Lawrence or River St. John. From thence by the line drawn from the head of the river was the St. through Lake St. John, south end of the lake, Basin, where hence the said line crossing the river St. Lawrence and Champlain Lake in the 45 degrees of north latitude, pass along the highlands which divide the rivers, empty themselves into the St. Lawrence River, from this which fall into the sea, and along the north coast of Bay de Chaleur and the coast of the Gulf of St. Lawrence to Cape Rosier, and from there hence coming to the Mount St. Lawrence River by the west end of the land, the island of Anticosta terminates the foremost river of St. John. And that describes the area where how the area that was given up by the French toward and ceded onto the British. Secondly, the government of East Florida, bound to the western bay of Gulf of Mexico and the Appalachian River to the northwest by the line drawn, part of the said river where the Chattahoochee and Flint rivers meet, the source of St. Mary's River, to the course of said river to the Atlantic Ocean, and to the eastward and westward, southward by the Atlantic Ocean and the Gulf of Florida, including islands within 6 leagues of the sea coast. Thirdly, the government of what you call Florida, bound by the south bound to the southward by the Gulf of Mexico, including the island from within 6 leagues of the coast from the river of Apalachicola to Lake Chardien to the westward by the said Lake Mirapaw. The Mississippi north by the line drawn east to the part of the Mississippi River, which lies in 32 latitude north. Which 32 degrees latitude north. The river Apalachicola and Jahachi, and to the east, covered by the said river. And further, fourthly, the government of Grenada comprehending the island of that name, together with Canadians and the islands of Dominico, Saint Vincent and Tobago, and to the east, open to the free fishery of open our subjects may be extended and carried out upon the coast of Labrador and the adjacent island. We thought, with the advice of the Privy Council, to put that all the coast from the St. John's to the Hudson Bay Strait, through with the islands of Anticosta and Mandalay, all other smaller islands lying upon the said coast, under care and inspection of our governor of Newfoundland. So this what happened there is that in all this land that was written in here, is like Britain put a flag, like putting a big flag in that area and claiming to be their own. We have also had the advice of the Privy Council through fit to annex the islands of St. John, Cape Breton, and Isle Royale, with the easier islands adjacent thereto, to our government of Nova Scotia. So they further went on and said, in all of this land, all these islands, on behalf of the British Crown, and the government of Nova Scotia, we claim this area. And whereas we greatly contribute to the speedy setting our said new governments, and our loving subjects would be informed of our paternal care to the security of liberties, prosperity, properties of those who are and shall become inhabitants thereto. We have thought fit to publish and declare by our proclamation that we have in the lettered patent under the Great Seal of Britain, of which said governments are constituted. What it's saying is all those, what do you call it, governments mentioned, they're all part of Britain, and British law will apply. The governments are constituted, given express power and direction to our governors of our said colonies, respectively, so soon the state and circumstances of the said colony will admit thereto. They shall, with the advice and consent of the members of our council, summon and shall call general assemblies within the said governments, respectively, in such a manner to formally used and directed those colonies and provinces which are under our government. We have also given power to the said governors, with the consent of our council and the representatives of people, so that to be summoned as formed said to make, constitute, and ordain laws, statutes, and ordinances for the public peace, welfare, and good government of our said colony, and the people and the inhabitants thereto, as near may be agreeable to the laws of England. Such regulations and restrictions are used in our colony. And in the meantime, assemblies can be called as aforesaid. Persons inhabiting or resorting to our said colony may confine in our royal protection for the enjoyment of benefits of laws of our realm of England, of which purpose we have given power under our great seal and the governors of our colony respectively to erect and constitute with the advice of said councils respectively courts of judicial and public justice within our colony for the hearing and determining all causes as well as criminal as civil according to law and equity, as near may be agreeable to the laws of England, liberty of persons without themselves agreed by the sentence of such courts. In all cases to appeal under the usual limitation restrictions to us in our previous council. We have also thought fit that with the advice of previous council as aforesaid to give unto the governors and council are said 3 colonies upon the continent full power authority to settle and agree with the inhabitants of our new colony, or any other persons who shall resort thereunto for such lands, tenements, and year 2 are now or thereafter shall be our power dispose of our power to dispose of, and then grant any such person or persons upon such term which they moderate good rent services, acknowledgement of being appointed and settled in our colonies. Other conditions shall appear to be unto us necessary, expedite, and advance guarantees and the improvement and settlement of our colony. So the proclamation outlines that certain powers that the colonies, that British colonies that were in existence at that time, to have power to be able to regulate certain matters that are what do you call it within their colony, within the colony to settle disputes so forth, so on and so forth. It also outlines it read this way. As we do further declare, it may be our royal will and pleasure for the present as foremost to reserve our sovereignty, protection, and dominion for the use of the said Indians. All lands, territories not included within the limits of our said 3 new governments, or within the limits of territory granted to the Hudson Bay Company, and also lands and territories lying within the westward and sources rivers which flow into the sea, west, northwest, and do hereby strictly forbid, on pain of our displeasure, our loving subjects from making any purchase, settlement, whatsoever, using possession of lands above reserve without our essential leave, license of the purpose, license that purpose first obtained. So what that's done is that the government started to lay out the groundwork under the proclamation to say these things will happen. From here on in, these things will happen in America. And what came out of that for Aboriginal people was that that's where treaties began. Once the treaties began, it started to the government, the people, the non-Aboriginal people wanted to buy land more and more. There were land speculators, so on and so forth, that came into play, and they wanted more land. So that's how the treaty process moved from the maritime inland into the Great Lakes, out of the Great Lakes into Manitoba, into Saskatchewan, and into Alberta, and into BC eventually. We had a number of processes that there were treaties which were pre-Confederation. They were called peace and friendship treaty, and then there was the treaties that were made after Confederation. They were called a number of treaties, and then after that there was some other treaties that came about where like the Nishka and also the James Bay Hydro Development Agreement. So there was a natural progression of events that took place in order to want to accommodate the needs of non-Aboriginal people. And during that process for us as Aboriginal people, we started to then it started putting us into small pieces of land for our youth. And there was promise that nobody would bother us. There was when you talk about the discussion about the wampum belt, there were 2-row wampum belts, it's called, and I don't know what the Aboriginal name for it, but the 2-row wampum belt is what existed in the time. One was the Aboriginal way and the other one was the non-Aboriginal. And what was agreed to was that these two would move forward in tandem with each other as the country developed. But what ended up happening was that just like the Royal Proclamation happened about. One side forgot about the agreement that was reached and started just doing what they said they were going to do for themselves, and it and what ended up happening is that it ended up happening is we have these processes that are in place, and so what we're going to do is we're going to stop there and allow, as I said, people to make comment or to ask questions. Because tomorrow we will begin by talking about initially a little bit, or talk a little bit about maybe a half an hour or so about the Treaty of Niagara, because that's what followed after this second history, where you have the Royal Proclamation, then you have the Treaty of Niagara, and that's where people were meeting in the Niagara area on the Proclamation, and came to some understanding how they're going to move forward into the future. One of coexistence and one of what do you call it, how developments take place. The other part for tomorrow is going to be the Treaty of 1850. So there's going to be the first part of the presentation in the morning is going to be about the Treaty of Niagara, and then the second half in the afternoon is going to be about a treaty, 1850 treaty. So that's how we're gonna schedule that. How we're gonna schedule the events for tomorrow. So if anybody's got any kind of even a comment or a question, now's the time to do it. And if you don't want to be seen or heard, and I shouldn't say that. If you don't want to be seen, you can put it on chat, ask the question in the chat, and I'll bring it forward to the rest of the group.
I don't see anybody's hands up. I don't see chat. Miigwech for that overview and for the video. I think it's something that we are challenged with every day is, as community planners, as, speaking, in a planning purpose or with our community members as well as, how do we translate, historical documents or treaties or the proclamation into the work that we do today. So if we were to find that little glimmer, that essence from that, Bentley, what would you advise? Like what do we see in that in this day and age?
Yeah, what happens is you read history, like the document different. Everybody's got different. Even historians have argued their what do you call it, or present their cases in different way. Well, I try to avoid that as much as I can, do it from that perspective. I think what I would advise people is to seek people in their community that know these things. 'Cause they're there. They're there. Those people are there. Honestly, they're there. Okay. They and when you go see them, they'll tell you this is what they'll tell you. I've been waiting for you. I knew you were coming. They'll tell you that. And then they'll make a pot of tea, maybe some bannock or whatever, and start expressing what they know. And from that you will learn as an individual. You will learn what the elders are thinking, because they know a lot of this they haven't even heard about. And as they hear about it, as you ask them questions, they will say, "Oh yeah, okay, that," and then they'll tell you what it is. And this could go on for a long time. I know one young lady told me he went and visited somebody in the community had said, "Why don't you go talk to so and so if you're interested in what happened in the past?" And I think she said she was there for 6 hours listening to this lady talking about what happened in the past. And that's what I recommend to everybody, is to go talk to the elders. They will tell you. They will tell you what had happened. And some of it's not very nice stories. Honestly, they're not very nice stories because of their own experiences. But what's important is to be able to tell that story, okay? Because that's the way we communicate. We communicate through stories. We tell stories, and that's how we communicate. And the more people that get into that storytelling or whatever, the more we will learn from each other. What not necessarily we can't. There's no way for me to hit the nail on the head and say this is exactly what happened. I don't know that. But from what the elders have told me, I know I'm close in there somewhere. And involving them into the future is going to have what you call it. It's going to have that positive impact on my life and your life and everybody's life, and that's why we need to bring the elders in, and bringing the elders in is not about having a 3-day meeting and everybody says their thing and then they leave. That's not what it's about. What it's about is people from the community, young people, middle-aged people, and even other elders, finding out from each other what they thought really happened. Because I don't. If you would say, if I would ask you a question, if I all of a sudden they show up and they say, "Look, I want your land," okay, and if you give me your land, I will give you a land in return. Right away, a question comes up. You want my land, but you're going to give me land in return. It's my land you're talking about. See, those kind of things will happen. But if from that, we should learn how to approach the subject of what do you call it? What do we need to know? Because it's not about. See, I hear a lot about, not a lot, but I hear quite a bit about what's happening to the Lake Huron, Lake Superior settlement. Okay, so people talk. So what happens is the approach, I think, sometimes is one of that may not be conducive to what do you call that? Reaching something that the objective is kind of lost along the way. It's about, oh, I'm going to get so much money. That's not what it's about. What it's about is how we live today, how we live in the past, how we live today, and how we want to live into the future. That's what it's about. And people have to address it from that perspective. So go to the elders, and the elders will tell you how to deal with that situation.
Now me which.
Is there somebody on chat or?
Well, we do have somebody said that here's a question, but they're waiting tomorrow to write it. But can you ask today?
Okay. You know what they call it? Is it like I said, if you, I don't know. I personally, I don't know what the answer is, but I can tell you how to go find the answer, and I think I did already. Yeah, go visit the elders, and the elders will tell you. You know how the elders, when they talk, they say, "Well, they make a long story, and be prepared to sit down and listen, because the punchline is going to be an hour away. They'll tell you the story, beautiful story, but then at the end they'll have that what they call the answer for you. So it's their way of what you call keeping you captured, and it's a way for them to make you understand what really what the real story is, if you want to say, because storytelling is one of the best gifts that we ever got, honestly, and we're forgetting that. We're not using that. We can't even talk our language somewhat. And as long as that happens, you're always going to have that reluctance to go on, what do you call it, go see the elders, because the knowledge is there, and I think it's important that that everybody take the time, even go visit maybe your own grandfather, your own grandmother, and maybe they will tell you, "What you go talk to so and so," and that way, because they know amongst themselves, not everybody's an expert in one area, if you want to call it that. They know who the individual that was given the responsibility to be to look after the storytelling behind a subject, that was what they call it, that came out of the lives of our people. So it's I cannot also get away from the fact that in our education system, we have to teach our children about our history, and it's not necessarily in terms of how one knows it, but the history of our people in terms of how a lot of people know it, because that's where you get answers. You get answers from what do you call it? We're talking to the elders and say, well, if this is what happened, and then the elder will say, well, if that's what happened, maybe this happened too. And then somebody else says, yeah, if that's what happened, then this is what happened. See that the discussion evolved. And through that, because we have the Creator has given us the gift to be able to have, what do you call it, the gift to be able to, through storytelling, to be able to inform ourselves, the importance of certain traditions that we have, the pipe ceremony, all of those things that our people were doing then and continuing to do, and the importance of, and that's what I feel, that this should be passed on to our younger generation. At first, they will come and say, "Oh, not that again," you know. All those things will happen. So what? But if it's done in the right way, they begin to catch on. Because I saw that in my lifetime. I was a restaurant school survivor. I saw that what do you call it? I saw that in life. I saw it when they were how our children, how as a child, to be apprehended and to be put through the rest of the school system, and then coming back and not knowing anything about our people. I know they existed. I know they walk down the street, but not knowing the traditional practice of our people. I'll put it that way. I remember one time when I was young, I went to this island with my grandfather, and my grandfather said, we saw this it's a wigwam type of thing. So I told him, I said, what is that? He said, well, that's maybe first let's make tea first, and then we'll talk about that after. And then, because that to me always has been, let's make a pot of tea, and I know I'm going to be there for a long time. I mean 2-3 hours. But then he explained to me what the wigwam was for. That what do you call that? Where you have your prayers and all that thing, and this is the closest that you'll ever get to the Creator. That's right. And I never knew that. Didn't know those things. And then of course, I became very active in asking all kinds of questions, because I wanted to know. Then after a while, they tell me, okay, keep quiet now, you're asking too much. But that's what happens. And that's how you learn that. And I cannot express the importance of our young people knowing that. It can't. I don't say anything that's going to hurt them. Right? Knowing that. And I think, and young people, especially now 4 or 5-year-olds they'll have all kinds of questions about what you call our people. And if one is not there to answer them, and parents have to learn what I'm talking about. how are you going to be able to? It's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. Yes, it's a long process, but as Murray says in his closing remarks, what happened with our people, or what do we know what happened to our people, and where they are today, and what the future holds. We know all those things, but we should be teaching our young people those important things. And people will ask and say things like, well, I want to get out of this life. I drink too much, use too much drugs. Right? People are looking for ways to get away from what they're doing. This is an opportunity for them to be able to get out of that and say, well, okay, I'll ask somebody about the ways of our people going forward into the future. And then it takes time within yourself to be able to say, yeah, I'm going to do that. So I'm going to find out, because what I read about was about the savage we are, or a bunch of scalpers, or whatever. We scalp people, we kill people. We were such horrible people, and I realize now that we weren't. That's not. We weren't like that, and we're not like that even today. So I think it's important that our children hear that, because they're told about it in some other places. They'll face that in their lives when the first person that comes along and says, you dirty Indian, you're just scalp people and all like that. Then they'll know how to handle it, how to deal with it going into the future. So it's important that there's people in the community that know those things to be able to teach young people. And that could be done through story. There's they call it now, what they call digital stories. People talk about, and I've done a couple myself, and I did one on health. I did another one on what they call it on education and doing this kind of thing. The only thing I got no control over is when somebody takes it from me, I don't know what happens to it. You know what I mean? Kind of like, so that's the way that of doing it is. We can go on and say, well, poor me and poor, you know. No, that's not the way. We got to deal with it from our own perspective and use our traditions and teachings that we've been taught to be able to deal with what we have. And it's not going to be the most beautiful journey that you will have in one way, because it brings back a lot of memories. But eventually that journey will become happy and as we move along. So anyway, I better quit talking. 3 o'clock.
Yeah, you don't have to quit talking. And you know, when I'm listening,
Yeah.
when I'm listening about what you're saying about listening to the elders about the past and they remind us, I think it's also important to listen to the kids too, because what the kids want, what they see, that's the future. So it's the blending of the past with the future, and us in between have to try to find those ways to plan, right, to where we bring, have the past in the present and going into the future. I have a daughter, she's 7 years old. Sometimes I don't even talk to her. I will just watch her, just it's observe. And then I can, it helps me try to understand or learn more about, say somebody her age, like what they want in the future, and listen to the questions that they ask. I see that connection. You talked about it today in the video. Marie Sinclair talked about it as well. It's that education, it's that teaching, that coming together of past, present, and future. So that's something that I always make sure to keep in my mind when I'm looking at.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's important. It's very important. Yeah.
Yep.
Because when we say, because we're using English as a working language, but I think what do you call it when we say education, this colonial education system comes in mind right away. That's not what I'm talking about. How we teach our children going into the future is based on what you're talking about. As a parent, because you're living in a world that you can see far beyond what your children can see, and your responsibility is to be able to prepare them for what's coming, and I think that's what's important in this, because we think about the education from the English word education. It's got to be this way, that way, that way. No, education is about how we teach our children, especially some of the traditional stuff, because no non-native person can come in and start doing that for us. They can't. You gotta be able to do that ourselves, first of all as parents, but also as elders. We should be able to, what do you call it, be able to teach young people, younger adults, how to express those, what do you call it, teachings to our children, to your children, so that the message is always the same. The message comes in from the elders, from middle-aged people, the counselors, the chief. The message is the same. It's not all over the place. It's the same, and that's what's going to make the going forward on a going forward basis more meaningful, more, what do you call it, away from some of the impediments that we have right now, like drugs, and alcohol, and all the things. The thing would be to teach our children that the proper way, because the proper way, I mean, like my grandfather would say, well, there's alcohol. And so he said, I believe in God's creation. And God gave the mind to somebody to make alcohol. It happened. But but what we don't do is we don't learn how to use it properly. We don't learn that. We use it from a perspective, and we're gonna go get drunk, we're gonna have a good time, and all that kind. The drugs is the same way. It's the same thing. We're gonna take something, and we're gonna go have a good time, looking for the ultimate high and all that kind of stuff. But there's a way that I know. There's a way that through understanding of, what do you call it, the different traditions that have been put in place for us, understanding them, how they work, understanding them that it's not what they call them. It's not, those things are not important, but we put importance in them. Some of us do, because that's the only out we think there is. And that is, I know now today, what I know now when I was younger, that's not the only, not the only way out. There's another way that you can get out, and what's more important to you than your traditions, the things that have, what do you call it, been beneficial for us. And that's a medicine. That's medicine. Medicine is telling these stories. Medicine is what do you call it, how we do things. The kind of activities we have. If we love to go hunting, love to be in the bush, you know what I mean? That's where we're brought up. So that's medicine. Then if you start looking at these other things, you start looking at drugs and alcohol, and there's no medicine in that. You can soon become, what do you call it, find a way to get away from it. Because I'm a very strong believer in turning things around for people. I'm a very strong believer in that. Because I've seen it. People have talked to me about it, that were heavy drug users and getting away from that, and getting away from that for their own good. Some of them take up Western religion to do it. And some people use our culture to do it, kind of thing. So it's a mixed bag of a lot of things, but the results are the same at the end. So okay, so anyway, tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock we will get going again.
Now,
Okay.
miigwech,
Yeah.
Bentley, and
Yeah.
miigwech to everybody who joined us today. And like you said, we'll be back on for another virtual session with Bentley tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock in the morning.
Okay. Good night.
Now, miigwech, everybody. Have a good day.
Yeah.